Awesome. Hey, everybody. Let me start over. Very glad to have everybody join us here today. Very excited to introduce you to my friend Denise Gelfand of Post PEO. And so, as you can guess from the title and also by the name of her firm, she's somebody that has an immense amount of experience in working in PEOs, working with PEOs, and then ultimately for those groups where the PEO is no longer a fit for them, transitioning out of that relationship where I think the idea, again, Denise, and we'll get into this more, but the idea behind PEOs in general is that you've kind of got a one-stop shop for everything, right? You've got payroll, you've got HR services and support, you've got benefits, and all of these things are integrated on one system. And so it can sound great to have everything all in one place. And then maybe as you begin to grow and scale and needs diversify and change and different things, you may end up outgrowing that model. And so what Denise does with Post PEO is she helps facilitate that change because as you can imagine with a number of different dates and you've got different cancellation or termination policies around that. Anyways, just kind of navigating all of those things. That's where Denise has a great amount of expertise. And we thought this would be a great time of year to introduce this for a couple of reasons. One is Denise and I have somebody that we're working with together in common with right now to help unravel the PEO situation that they're in. And then also there's probably some of you that are tuning in today that are contemplating that and maybe looking at making this change effective, the beginning of the year or that type of thing. So anyhow, we want to definitely keep this conversational. We want to keep this educational as we always do. But Denise, if you wouldn't mind, give us your background and maybe more of an introduction to how you got into the role that you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris. So I was introduced to the P.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and as far as I know, I mean, I haven't seen anybody else that does what you do, right? Like you're one of one as far as I'm concerned. But you know, which is it is very unique. And you're right. There are a lot of folks out there that it's like you know they just they want to help you find the right PEO. But I think what I heard you say there, which is really important, is help determine if the PEO is actually right for you, right? And not just like okay, here's you know here's the, like maybe the best in breed or the top two or three PEOs that I'd recommend in your situation. It's maybe taking that step back and looking at it from a different perspective and saying, you know, is this right? What is it you actually want? You're saying you want a PEO because we've seen this and we've heard this at our firm too, where somebody says, yeah, we really want a PEO, and you know that's it, when it's like let's take a step back. Why is that? What's the perception that you're going to get in that kind of an arrangement that you wouldn't you know that your perception is you wouldn't get if you had this kind of unbundled approach of having payroll be separate from your HR consulting, separate from your benefits. You know, what is the advantage that you're looking at, or you know, you're looking for there? And part of it is what you touched on as well, as I think a lot of times they just want it all in one place. Whereas, hey, look, if you've got you know, if you've got a payroll system that's working well, but then you've got, and maybe HR is working well, but then you've got a benefits program that is not working. It's so much easier to just change that one component than it is to say, okay, well, this PEO is great, but our benefit, we're paying way too much for benefits. Well, now you have to unravel the whole thing, right? So that's kind of the, you know, that's kind of the hidden gotcha, I guess, if you will, for, you know, for what you're expecting and versus what you're, you know, what you actually get, unfortunately. So, yeah, it's interesting where as you start to back into it, it's like, well, we want all of these systems to be integrated and such, and you know, and fortunately, we live in a day and age now where a lot of these systems can be integrated in such a way that you don't have to. There's not this redundancy. There's not this dual system data entry. You can enter something in your payroll. It goes into a system with a benefit admin system and then back into payroll when somebody's completed their enrollment or whatever the process or procedure is. So yeah, so no, I think that's certainly an interesting point. So um, uh, could you maybe expand on that a little bit, or yeah, what do you think? Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Mm. Right, right. Yeah, well, absolutely, absolutely. Um, and and we've seen that too, right? Where again, they think they're getting this, legal and HR support and things like that, and and that's part of the investment that they're making, right? But then when it comes down to it, we get a lot of those questions there at our firm, right? A lot of times, I think the benefits folks are sometimes seen as an extension of your HR department, and maybe rightly so in some cases, right? Particularly with some of the compliance things that we have to be concerned about. But ultimately, a lot of these things, there's a number of them that come to mind where it's on the employer ultimately is the one who has to be in compliance. And yeah, your benefits experts can give you some of that guidance, but also, again, as you mentioned, just kind of thinking strategically rather than being. I think if you're in a generalist kind of position, you're going to be a little bit more reactive, right? And that's part of being a generalist is right. You get a little bit of a flavor of a lot of different kind of problems, and then come up with ways to solve those or create some processes and procedures around how to deal with some of those things. So yeah, it's just always kind of interesting where it's like, hey, we need some help with this, and and we're on our team kind of just thinking, well, don't aren't you paying somebody else for that already? Like, what do you need our help for, right? Like, so anyway, job security for us, I suppose, but yeah, more to to your point, it's like what do you actually need? What are your expectations? And and how can we help match those up, right? Um, so what have you seen, I guess, maybe over more recent times? And you mentioned that. Yeah, continue. Yeah, go ahead. Continue that thought. Mm, Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and that I think is where where particularly where your service, Denise, at Post PEO, is extremely important because managing that timeline and all of those different areas of things you need to manage. Again, I think right if you're like a CFO or a controller, you're going to be maybe a little bit more focused on the payroll side of things, whereas if you're in HR, it's maybe more the benefits and HR side of things. But again, just managing those timelines and when you have to give notice to the PEO and what needs to be, in place prior to that. And just, one of the projects that you're working on, I know, is, doing this RFP process for new payroll solutions, right? So, again, having to manage all that. So talk about that maybe for a little bit, just what that looks like if you do find a group that says, okay, we've been in this PEO, it's been great for us, but we've had enough, we've outgrown it, whatever the reasons are that they want to leave. No service, no support. I mean, it's typically one of these same two or three things is a reason why they would leave. But what does that look like for you then at that point where they say no, we're done, we've had enough, and then they've hired you and you've stepped in and are starting to go through your process. Walk us through what that looks like. All right. Hey, sorry folks, we had some technical difficulties over here. All right. Hey, sorry, folks. We had some technical difficulties over here. We are back and going to do the second half of this conversation. So, because as I mentioned on the outset, this is definitely a very important topic, particularly this time of year, for those groups that are looking perhaps to either just evaluate PEOs that are out there or potentially evaluate their options to move outside of those PEOs. So, Denise, you had a good head of steam there, and then and then we lost you. Just, I guess, try to pick it up where you were. We were talking about kind of that RFP process, if you will, or just
Right,
as you're engaging with a group and helping them decide which PEO or if a PEO is right, and then to the point where if they decide a PEO is not right, then
yeah,
you help them evaluate those other options that are out there. And again, also as I said from the outset, you're one of one as I know it because I don't know anybody else who takes the time to figure that out. And you've got a very robust kind of HR needs analysis that you do with folks, which I think is great. From a consulting perspective, you're really doing that work on the front end to make sure that they don't get 6 months in or 12 months in and then realize, oh, this wasn't going to work for us, right? So,
right. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, doing the RFP for the payroll HRIS side, it requires, just really digging deep with the client to really understand like, what their needs are, what's worked for them in the PEO, what's not working for them, and what, like I said, what all of their goals are. Down the road, what kind of platforms and processes do they have in place now that maybe aren't streamlined currently? I was talking to one client that I am now finishing doing a transition, but they had a lot of paper that they were doing and then having to do depositories like into Dropbox or into other types of platforms, and they were really looking to streamline all of that so that everything was in one system in one place, and to make the employee experience much more robust, where they had where employees can go online, and if they had certain questions for HR, even simple questions like, what's our vacation, what's my what are the holidays that we have off, or what is, how much sick time do I have? It's like it can refer them to like their employee handbook right online, where they don't even have to go into HR to ask that question. And from the HR side is to make those processes a lot easier, where, sick time or PTO, it's all in one place. And so, employees, if a company wants to allow employees to have more sick time than they have available, then that's a policy that's up to the company. But how does the payroll system accommodate that? And what kind of notifications does it send out? So it's really, I think, building those efficiencies so that it's not, something that could take HR 2 or 3 hours to do is maybe only taking them now 15 minutes. And then how does HR interact with finance? What kind of reports does finance need to make certain decisions and budgets and things like that? And so really having some heavy like data analytics to look at, and the importance of that is something that we get very much into. It's really understanding the client and their unique needs, because every client is a little bit different, and what their needs are different, and it depends on the industry they're in. Do they have a
right,
lot
yeah,
of seasonal
absolutely,
employees?
and yeah, and it's like that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, and it's certainly that way with benefits too. I mean, as much as you would think that you can just apply the same strategy, broad strokes across the board. It's nothing is one size fits all. And I think particularly if you're if you're working somebody who specializes and somebody that takes this consulting approach, as I know you do, and certainly as we do, um, you're not going to get, you're not going to get these cookie cutter solutions, right? You're going to get something that is bespoke to what you need and what you want, and your unique business and your unique makeup of the employees that are the engine of that, right? So, yeah, I think that's a really important point to underscore. And as you said too, how do those teams work together, right? So some of those smaller teams, you might not technically really have an HR, right? You've got somebody that's maybe a controller, accountant, or even the owner themselves that is kind of also doing a lot of the HR functions, right? And so,
Right.
how do you when you've got and then to expand that, when you do have a larger organization and you've got separate departments of HR and finance and things, um, how do they communicate? How do they work well together? How do they, what are the considerations that each of these stakeholders have? And it's almost, we've done this in the past where, so much of what we do with the benefits is trying to build consensus among these people. In some ways, if you've got people that are doing completely different functions, and they're very siloed in what they do, how do you build that bridge, and how do you make sure that because somebody doesn't know what they're supposed to be doing, and the other person, that then ultimately the system gets blamed, right? It's, well, there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with me, there's something wrong with this program that we're using, when, well, okay, maybe that's not reality, but if you can kind of do that front end consultative work to figure out what people's values are and what they really want out of this, and individually as well as the collective of those people you have to build consensus with, that I think is what's extremely important. And again, where I think that many times smaller organizations might see a PEO as a shortcut to be able to do that. Well, if we're all in the same system, the thinking goes that we'll have access to all the same information, and we won't have, we'll all be pulling from the same area, right? So whereas as maybe taking that cookie cutter approach isn't necessarily what you really want or what you really need. So that's an important point that I definitely wanted to underscore there. So, um, yeah, no, that's interesting. Well, maybe do you have any examples? I know, again, we've got this mutual group that we're working with at the moment, and I know a big part of what you've done with them was doing a contract review. So, tell me a little bit about what you look for as you're doing those contract reviews, and you're starting to kind of dig into some of those details. What does that look like for you? Mm, Yeah, well, and then I imagine there typically is going to be some kind of like notice. You've got to give them, I don't know, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days in advance notice. That might be a consideration too, is yeah, and making sure that you do well, yeah, and making sure that you do give them notice, so that you don't have to pay for extra run out months of service where you're not going to be using them anymore, right? Yeah. So obviously I know that. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, please. No, share your examples. Yeah. Hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And I think that it goes back to like what we talked about when we did this recording back at the beginning of the month, right? Was we kind of touched on some of those savings and just kind of the opaque nature of how that looks. I mean, there's many times where and every PEO is a little bit different, but you don't know exactly what are the admin fees, what's software, what's the benefits, it doesn't always have that kind of clear breakdown as if you've had any kind of at least I'll speak about the benefits programs in the past. You've got an itemized bill where you know exactly who's on coverage, who's got spouses, who's got kids, what the rates are, what that family rate is, right? All of those things, and you don't always get that level of transparency, which seems crazy again in 2025 to not have that level of detail about exactly what where each of these different dollars are going and that type of thing. And that's part of why I think in some cases people will take a look at it and see, because a lot of times it's like, look, if you're paying or everybody else is paying $1 for insurance, that you're paying $1.10 when you're inside the PEO, but yet you don't even really realize that. And sometimes the other part of the problem is there certainly are some PEOs that do work with benefits brokers that they can carve out that piece of it and do that separately. A lot of them have their own kind of master plan or their own house plan that you need to qualify for and you need to be in. And then again, you don't have that level of control over plan design, over, how the plan is structured and built. And then again, also these are kind of fully insured equivalents where if your plan does run well, or if your employees are have a low utilization or what have you, it's not as though you can participate in any of that savings or even have any of that data behind that to be able to make informed decisions and to evaluate if there's something else. It's kind of it's a take it or leave it kind of approach. And Yeah, so we've seen plenty of that too, where yeah, just introducing that level of transparency, which is what we seek to do with all of the insurance contracts, right? Is to understand, okay, so for example, something I would equate to what you do on the PEO side is when we look at PBM contracts, right? Like how do they define what a rebate is, right? What are they defining as third party compensation? What are they defining as, how does their formulary set up versus for generics versus brand versus specialty? And what you find is that there's all this opaqueness in there, so they can kind of charge whatever they want, and then just point back to their very non-transparent contract language and say, "Oh no, look, see, we did what we said we were going to do in the contract." When in reality, the contract does not make any sense or doesn't clearly define some of these things. So, yeah, it's interesting to see the parallels in that. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had a situation like that. Yeah, they're not going to have that level. Mhm. Right, right. And then it's very daunting to want to make that change, which, is why you've kind of created this role with Post PEO. Yeah, no, I think that's it's a good point. I know we've touched on that a couple of times, but it is important to note that, yeah, it's much easier to change one of these components, right? When you think about surrounding yourself with that team. And again, if you've got, maybe if you're in finance, you're going to be a little bit closer to the day in, day out of payroll and how that runs, right? Whereas maybe if you're in HR, you're going to be a little bit closer to the day-to-day, benefits administration side of things, right? I'm just kind of generalizing here, but just kind of thinking through that is that, if you've got kind of one person who, or one department, I guess maybe, who's in charge of one of these functions, and then somebody else who's in charge of another one, and they kind of take the lead there. Obviously, there's still some consensus to be built, and communication and back and forth and things like that. But it becomes a little bit easier when when you do have those separate silos, and then and I think it's also important to see how some of those work together, right? I mean, that's one of my favorite things is like even for example, this one we're working on together. I could very quickly tell during my discovery initial call with them in the very beginning that um, that they're in this PEO arrangement. They have been scaling and growing and getting larger, and have outgrown it and had some other challenges within that with service and such. But ultimately, it was, I think, kind of helped me in my process, because I can't begin to unravel a PEO contract, or help them figure all that out. Could I do it? Yeah, perhaps, but it's going to be very time consuming with no guarantee of success at the end. So it's like, hey, you guys need to talk to Denise, right? That's the stage we're at right now. Is you need to talk to her, help her kind of evaluate or help evaluate what you guys are looking to accomplish, and then ultimately, now what we've been able to do is just focus on what we do best in designing health plans and bringing them some new solutions in that area, and things like that. So, then rather than just having this one solution that you're hoping works, you've now got this team around you that's working together for your benefit. And ultimately, I think that's what, I think ultimately that's what most businesses would want to see. If you really kind of broke it down for them that way and showed them that perspective, maybe they haven't thought they can approach it from that perspective, or they just thought, well, this will be good enough type of thing, right? Yep. Yeah. Hmm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's great, and a good point for us to wrap up with here at this point too. So, Denise, anything else that we haven't covered? Anything else, or maybe just remind people where they can find you, how they can get a hold of you, as we wrap up here in the next couple minutes. Perfect. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks, Denise. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And if you're watching the recording, certainly reach out to us as well too. Appreciate you guys being on today. Thank you, Denise, for being on. Really appreciate the insights that you were able to share with the audience today. And yeah, until next time.